we're going to get into the story of Napalm Death, leading up to and talking about the recording of Scum. But I think that to fully understand Napalm Death, we first need to do a quick history of UK punk. And I will preface this by saying this is no means exhaustive. I am not a connoisseur of punk. And I think that we have to have a baseline understanding, but we're going to just hit the hits basically and give you an idea of where they came from, because the story of punk is way too fascinating to cover in even one episode of this show, let alone as a preamble to another episode. So we're going to just run through it really quickly. So punk came about in the early to mid 70s with bands like the Ramones, and Television in the US were kind of precursors, Sex Pistols, the Buzzcocks in the UK, sort of developing the sound that would become known as punk rock. Punk was kind of a reaction, especially by young people, to the perceived staleness of rock and roll that resulted from the 60s musical explosion. Now, basically, what punks thought is that you had a bunch of really great musicians in the 60s that were pushing the envelope and doing something new. And then after that, you had a bunch of just people coming in that were lazy, repeating those sounds, not doing anything new, making a ton of money off of it, but not breaking any new ground. It's almost like the groundbreaking stopped in 1970 and they were sort of like, wait, where's rock and roll going? Rock and roll has become stale. And so punk was sort of a rebellion against this perception of the staleness. And so what they decided to do was they wanted to go back to the roots of rock in the 50s. And oddly enough, in an attempt to go back to the roots of rock, they created a new sound. Now, especially in the UK, punk is a cultural phenomenon as well as a music phenomenon. And it was really helped along by this thing called the pub rock scene, which was a movement in the UK where lots of small pubs started hosting bands. And that was something that gave a lot more bands that would never have been able to get a show at the big venue in town an opportunity to play to 150 people in a room, because these pubs were like, hey, bands bring in drinkers, and we used to have piano players, but nobody wants that anymore. So why don't we just throw a stage on there and we'll have whatever the local artists are come and play. And it just so happened that at that time, a lot of them were inexperienced punk bands. And they were getting, again, this venue that was otherwise completely off limits to a shitty band that was barely rehearsed and hadn't been together for too long and could barely play their instruments. But it leads to this movement where people start getting into it. And that's what you like when you're, 16. I don't know what the drinking age is in the UK, but I'm assuming that they had like 12-year-olds in these bars.
Yeah, right.
When you're listening to this kind of stuff and that's what you have access to, that's what you become a fan of. And so it increased the potential buying audience for it. And that also led to this explosion in small indie labels that were putting out these DIY albums that had been recorded on the cheap by bands, doing limited run EPs and stuff like that. And so that also fuels a greater explosion, because the people who can't even go to these pubs are able to buy these EPs. The zine culture comes out of that, where people are writing about their local scene, and it just leads to this kind of explosion of popularity in punk. So, punk, it basically becomes a subculture. It's defined by rebelling against the stodgy institutions. So, very shortly thereafter, when punk becomes very popular, it shatters very quickly. The vibe gets
No
killed
longer
when,
punk. Right.
yeah, when the money comes in and the record labels come in and they're like, hey, maybe you should learn how to play your instruments and maybe you should write some real songs. This goes against what they were
It's not what it's about, man.
Yeah.
not
How
what it's
dare you make
about.
money?
Yeah, seriously.
Sell out.
How dare you get better at your craft, you fucking punks.
How
Or
dare you take a bunch of
non-punks.
money?
Yeah. So we've talked about this before. Punk, the rise and shattering of punk happens very, very quickly in like the late 70s, basically. So when it shatters, the scene turns into a bunch of these different subcultures. And the two subcultures that are important to our story are the anarcho punk and crust punk subgenres.
Delightful.
Fucking love those names.
Those are two different versions of punk. Now, anarcho punks were leftist, had a lot of anti-capitalist sentiments. They viewed rock as an agent of social change. So in a lot of ways, oddly, they believed in rock a lot more than like the people that were listening to rock regularly, because they're like, back in the day, rock like meant something. Rock can mean something. Rock can push the culture forward. Rock can try to expose some of these injustices that are out there. And crust punks, I'm going to shock you, also pretty anarchist. You know, they weren't really highly organized.
No.
Yeah, loved central authority or anything like that. But they were also influenced by extreme metal. So this is, you know, heavy, heavy music, very fast, lots of, you know, evil in the lyrics. So basically, this is the backdrop under which Napalm Death is forming, because this is all happening in the late 70s. And so Napalm Death, they were originally formed in 1981 by a duo of two musicians, bassist Nick Bullen and drummer Miles Ratledge. So they're really young at the time. Nick Bullen's like 14. So this is not some, you know, seasoned musician trying to get a new project off the ground. There's a couple of fucking kids who are like, hey man, I go to these fucking shows at 14 and I get drunk at the pub, because England in the 70s and the 80s is a fucking mess, I'm assuming. And like we can do this too. And we've talked about this with the importance of punk, is making music seem accessible, like making being in a band seem possible. Because you're like, these guys suck. And yeah, exactly. If they can do it, I can do it. They don't have some secret special sauce that you need 15, 20 years of dedication to get to. They just have attitude and they have some shitty gear. And anybody can get that, right?
We did.
Yeah, we did.
Did you?
At 16 years old, yes, we absolutely had access to shitty gear.
Yeah. So after going through several terrible names, as every high school band does, they finally settle on the name Napalm Death. Now, as of right now,
it's a good name.
It's a fucking good name.
It's a good name. I would agree with that.
Yeah. For this music, it's a great name. Yeah. I don't know if I would name my next band Napalm Death.
It doesn't fit my personality, but
no, it does not. I bathe too often for that, I imagine. So they have a bass player and a drummer. They recruit a guitar player, but they only managed to keep this lineup together for 2 months. And they add a bass player in early 1982 so that Nick can just sing.
They seem like such easygoing guys. You know?
I know. You know, listen, I will be fair, and he hasn't come up in our story yet, but the drummer on this album, Mick Harris, seems like a pretty cool guy, actually. Like I watched a probably like 50-minute like interview / documentary that was really just him talking the entire time, and he seemed like a pretty down to earth and cool guy. And I appreciated his approach to life and to music. He seems like the kind of guy I could have a beer with. Anyway, though, they're going to have some personnel problems to the point where oftentimes I won't even name the people that are here. I'm just going to say the name. This guy was here and then he's gone.
They were in the practice space for 1 hour and then left. All right, you don't get
this space.
Aren't there no original band members in the band now?
There's no original band members in the band now, and we're going to even get to an even worse version of that soon. So, all right, you got Nick and Miles. They recruit a guitar player that only stays around for 2 months. They add a bass player in early 1982 so that Nick can just sing. They swap out guitar players. They swap out guitar players again. They swap out bass players. They record some demos, but the whole endeavor falls apart by 1983, and they go on an indefinite hiatus at the end of 1983, which is going to bring us to our favorite segment on this podcast, which is Napalm Death Scum by the numbers.
Hell yeah.
So the first number I'm going to throw out there is 1984, as in 1,984 seconds, which is how long this album is. So considering that there are 28 tracks on this album, that means that each song averages just over 1 minute and 10 seconds long. Adam, you did the math wrong earlier.
That's not the first time, and it won't be the last time.
You run a standard deviation to get rid of the outliers?
Totally. Yeah, totally.
In all honesty, how does a band with an average song length of 1 minute and 10 seconds wear out their welcome as fast as Napalm Death does? I don't know, but they have achieved it, and it is admirable. I am sure that when they were making music as these youngins, I'm the exact person that they were hoping to turn off of music. They're like, you like fucking Steely
Yeah,
Dan,
they're like,
and
fuck
like,
Steely Dan.
exactly. You're like, you know, REO Speedwagon album is actually pretty good.
This is probably, in my thinking, what little I know about music, this is probably the least far away from Steely Dan you could get.
Yeah, this is the Steely Dan and Napalm Death. The fact that they even exist in the same thing called music
Yeah, it's wild.
it's a little wild. Yeah.
Right.
So the next number that we're going to throw out is 1,500, as in 1,500 albums pressed of Scum when it was originally released. It still seems high to me, but shows what I know, because the album sold over 10,000 copies in its first year. And although there are very few verified numbers, Mick Harris insists that it has sold over 100,000 copies total and has never been remastered. And Mick Harris insists that it never will be remastered if he has any say over it,
I
because
could tell.
that's the product. Yeah, exactly. It sounds like it was recorded in an alcoholic hobo's asshole or something like that. It sounds fucking terrible.
But you were talking about like the things that make the band at least digestible. And I did see an interview, it might have been the same one, where he was talking about it captured what they put on the record, captured that moment in time. And he doesn't want to go back and remaster it because that's cheating, right? You're approaching it with a 2020 or whatever it might be mindset, but that's what we did. We want to leave it that way. So I respect that.
Yeah.
I really like underproduced things. I like when you feel like you're in the fucking punk basement and the speaker is like right in front of your face, just blasting sound into your, like, pupils. I enjoy that. And there's a couple of songs.
You're also describing what they do to like prisoners in Guantanamo Bay with
Yeah.
that. When you say that this is what you enjoy,
You have to access a very primal part of yourself, and only then are you truly living.
That's good. Will be the byline on the episode.
So the next number that we're going to throw out there is 10, which is the number of members that this trio had to cycle through before they even recorded their album Scum, which was technically their debut album, their debut full-length album.
Wow.
For some strange reason, they had a hard time focusing, keeping the project together. I don't know why. Can't quite figure it out. The next number is 1.316, as in 1.316 seconds, which is the Guinness Book of World Records holder for the shortest song ever recorded. And that is the song You Suffer, the last song on the A side of this album.
Now,
So on Spotify, the song was 5 seconds long because I think
felt cheated.
Spotify. Yeah,
I felt
did
cheated
too.
by that.
I was actually bummed out. I was like, I think that this diminishes what they were going for. Like the fact that there apparently needs to be a minimum length of time for a song.
You know who I think created that Spotify rule, if that is in fact a rule, is Wolfpack.
No way.
Because they're the ones that published the Sleepify album of all 1 second silence tracks and had their entire fan base stream it while they slept and made a bunch of money. And then Spotify closed the loophole.
Yep.
Oh, that's awesome.
Wow.
Which, good for you, Wolfpack. I appreciate that. And even though I pay Spotify every month, they underpay their artists. So fuck Spotify, suck all the money you can out of it.
Yeah.
So yeah, they turned it into a weighty 5 seconds. It became too much to wade through for me personally.
Isn't that also You Suffer ? Isn't that a question?
I mean, it wasn't a question for me.
But I love in this that like a bunch of the lyrics are questions.
Yeah.
And there is no attempt to make an inflection in any way that it sounds like a question.
No.
Anytime.
Again, written after the fact, I'm sure.
Yeah.
There's no way these lyrics actually were real. The last number that we're going to touch on is just the number 1, as in there was only one member that participated in the recording of side A of Scum that was still in the band when they went in to record side B.
Wow.
That makes a lot of sense because there's a moment that I noted going through the album where I'm like, what the hell is happening? Something changed. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
And
I
yet
agree.
it still doesn't sound different. It
Right.
changed, but it still doesn't sound different.
It
There-
changed. No, I definitely like the back half better, though.
There
Yeah.
on the back half, there are some different vocals. There's some screechier vocals. They sound like a fucking dungeon master like role playing a quasit. But like I know I was
Way to get
actually
real relatable in there.
if you know, you know.
I wrote that if the orc veterans of Helm's Deep had made an album, there'd be
The ones that have like PTSD from the battle. Yeah, no, it's true.
I actually
Oh.
liked it. I liked that they switched up some of the vocals and to sound like a fucking goblin or something. Like
Yeah. I don't know if I'd say it was an artistic choice. It might have been a choice of necessity, but we'll get into that in the story. And before we get back to that story, just want to say thank you to everybody for listening. We do truly appreciate the listeners that rate and review us, write in, tell us what their experiences are, what we got right and wrong, tell a friend about it. And especially the ones that want to learn more about us and sign up to our mailing list, you can just email us at 1001albumcomplaints@gmail.com with the subject line add me. We will add you in. If you're writing us a missive about how terribly wrong we are and how Napalm Death Scum was the album that you walked down the aisle to when you got married or something like that, you can also include add me in the email at some point and you will stay abreast of all the happenings, including the stuff going on our Patreon page, where we have lots of bonus content for you and lots of great listener discussion that is happening, lots of funny comments, lots of insightful comments. It really is becoming a fantastic community of people interacting with us and interacting with each other. And so feel free to hop on over to 1001 Album Complaints on Patreon. Write in, let us know that you want to be added to the mailing list, and you will be up to date on all the happenings.
Just a
Actually,
quick heads up that if
in-
you do write in and tell us that you walked down the aisle to Napalm Death, you will not only be added to our email list, you will be added to an FBI watch list, which I think is appropriate.
and on the Mortimer Fathoms Twitch channel, we accept all. So, if you did
Okay.
walk down the aisle to Scum, please come over to
You're
Mortimer
welcome
Fathoms on
over.
Twitch. And we
Yes.
can fucking talk about how cool that was.
Adam, the time for you plugging your shit was earlier. Okay.
No, but they're feeling generous
Uh,
now because they're like, oh, I'll do that. So while they're doing that, they can
Mm.
come to my shit.
Okay.
That's
fair
smart,
enough.
man. Interspersed. I do the same thing. The Adams think alike.
Yeah, this is about networking.
Okay.
No, go to their thing. Don't go to my thing.
So we're going to get back to the story of Napalm Death leading up to and including Scum. So we're going to level set. They have gone on indefinite hiatus in 1983. They had cycled through a whole bunch of members, but Nick and Miles were still in the band. That's a bass player and a drummer. So during this time, Nick meets Justin Broderick. And he actually joins Justin's band called Final for a short period of time. In 1985, Napalm Death reforms with Nick on bass and vocals, Miles on drums, two other guitar players whose names are not important because the project falls apart after one show. The two guitar players leave, but Nick asks Justin Broderick to join after that because he's like, hey, we just played in a band together and I'm trying to keep this Napalm Death project going. So why don't you come join the band? Justin joins the band. They play their first show as a trio with Miles on drums in August of 1985. They are still very much in the post-punk world, but they're starting to incorporate more thrash metal into their sound. They added a new bass player. They recorded a demo. Again, the project falls apart. Nick and Justin want to explore more extreme music. Miles Ratledge, the drummer, isn't really on board for that. And it also kind of sounds like he couldn't quite keep up with the tempo that they were trying to push in the band. And so they say, hey, you know what? We need to find a new drummer. Enter
Couldn't blast.
Mick. Couldn't blast. That's good. So enter Mick Harris. Mick and Justin Broderick became friends in November of 1985. They meet at their local Birmingham pub called the Mermaid. That was a hangout for many kinds of people on the fringe of society, hardcore punks, rockabilly types, all the crust punks are hanging out there. Justin knew that Mick was a drummer, and shocker, Napalm does have some personnel issues. They need to make a change. So they were looking to play faster and harder, and Mick was the drummer of a local hardcore band called Anorexia. So they knew that he could play fast, and they're like, hey, why don't you come and join the band? And Mick was actually a fan of the band because he had been going to see them at the Mermaid for a really long time and had thought that they were doing some cool stuff and pushing the envelope. Now, the Mermaid was a local Birmingham venue that was one of those venues that cropped up during the pub rock movement. It was a small venue, held about 400 people. Apparently, it was owned by a nice older Asian family that were kind of just like, yeah, like whatever. And it became the center of this like hardcore punk scene in Birmingham. They had
Lucky them.
Yeah.
That's
they
amazing.
seem
Sound like the type
totally
of
cool with
people
it.
who wouldn't come in and tip well or drink a whole lot. I feel like they would just come in, watch, and leave.
Yeah.
Do you know, were they immigrants?
I think they were immigrants. Yeah.
Can you fucking imagine that story? Like, like I immigrated away from whatever the fuck was going on in my country, opened an establishment which became like a hardcore metal fucking venue.
Yeah. You're like, man, I came from like Bangladesh or someplace with like extreme poverty, and I come here and all these like middle class kids are like, fuck Britain,
Yeah.
it fucking sucks. They're like, this is my dream. You understand?
And you're like,
man, I fought so hard for this.
It's so fucking good.
Yeah. So the Mermaid's promoter, this guy named Daz Russell, he's a big promoter of the hardcore scene, but apparently the atmosphere there was really positive. Mick Harris said that he went there for years and years, was at like basically all the shows, and never one time saw a fight the entire time that he was there.
The safest I've ever felt was in the mosh pit.
Yeah. Punks are actually pretty nice people. Scary looking, but nice people in
Right.
general.
I'm not joking too. I feel a great sense of community whenever I mosh.
Wow.
Well, now I got to go mosh.
No.
Yeah, when was the last time you
Dad,
moshed?
let's
Come
do
on.
it. Let's go.
Adam, you will throw your back out in 40 seconds. in
No
the
way,
mosh
dude.
pit.
I am not as out of shape as you are. I could do
I
so many cartwheels
didn't
right
say other Adam. I said Adam.
now. Oh, okay, good.
I would die.
Yeah.
Adam is this Adam, other Adam. God damn it. All right.
Yeah,
screw
who
it.
fucking thought this?
You're
Who
the
thought
only one
this
who
would
can't
be a
keep
good
up with it,
idea?
other Adam. Come on. Get on board.
I'll
right.
mosh with you, Adam.
So he'd seen them play for quite a while. And he's kind of stoked to join the band. So again, we're going to give a timestamp here. It's December of 1985. Mick has his tryout for the band. And the tryout consists of Justin coming to Mick's parents' house, and they jam in Mick's room. And I got to tell you, I saw the room and I saw the house. It's a small house and it's a duplex and it's a small room. These must be the most understanding people in the universe.
I feel like jam needs even bigger quotes than sing.
Yeah,
I
right.
was going to say, what does that consist of?
They just smash their instruments in each other's presence for 40 minutes and like, man, I like your style, man. It's pretty good.
This song's called Animal from the Muppets Snorts Adderall.
Yes, Animal from the Muppets, absolutely.
Yeah, totally. All right. So January 1986, the band gets a rehearsal space, which means that up until then, they haven't really been rehearsing.
No.
Amazing.
Yeah. And to hear Mick tell it, like their rehearsals were the shows that they played. Like that's how they would rehearse. And it's just really considerate of the crowd when you work your shit out on stage live in front of people who paid to see you. That's just a cool thing to do. I really appreciate that when I have that
They feel part of
experience.
it. They feel part of the experience. They're part of the band. Ugh.
Yeah, it's not about the money, man.
Yeah. Well, they get their first gig.
You sound like a multinational corporation.
You do.
Yeah. Oh, all right. So January of 1986, early January, they get a rehearsal space. At this point, the band is Mick on drums, Justin on guitar, Nick on bass and vocals. So they get their first rehearsal space in January of 1986. And on January 18th of 1986, they play their first gig. So that is like how unrehearsed this band is. They basically just like, fuck it. We're going to play our first gig. And hey, where'd they get their first gig? It's the Mermaid, of course.
Nice.
It's the epicenter of the scene. And so they were playing shows, but not a ton of shows. They mostly played at the Mermaid. Occasionally they would play outside of Birmingham, but not a ton of shows, certainly no touring or anything like that. They recorded demo in March of 1986. And then in August of 1986, they go into Rich Bitch Studios to record what becomes the A-side of their album Scum.
Do we know who else was recording at Rich Bitch Studio?
I mean, I think all of the people from that scene, but frankly, I had to do a lot of research just to be able to get the storyline of this band together. I'm not trying to get the storyline of some other shit studio together too.
I just love thinking of some like, fucking 80s pop band, like some kind of like fucking Blondie ripoff. Like
So they book an overnight session. Oh, sorry. Before we get to that, they only record the first 16 tracks on the album.
Only
16 tracks only.
So about 4 minutes of music.
Because their assumption is that this is going to be a split EP with another band, but that falls apart. And so they are left with just the 16 songs that they've recorded. All right. So they booked the overnight session at Rich Bitch Studios because they are fucking poor bitches and cannot afford anything better. They said it was an 8-hour session, cost 120 pounds. And in one 8-hour session, they record and mix the 16 tracks that make up the first side of this album.
Mm.
So half an hour a song to record.
That's pretty impressive.
Did you get any sense of, is the short song part of the punk aesthetic? Like, what is that part about specifically?
Yes, that is part of this particular type of aesthetic that they were going for, which is not overly written and not, like not overly fussy. A whole bunch of parts, you got a bridge in your song. What the fuck's wrong with you? Type of shit. It's just get in, get out, move on.
I feel like most punk songs are pretty short. Like, give me a Ramones song that is over 4 minutes. I think there's like 3 of them.
Yeah, but there's a big difference between over 4 minutes. You're talking about conforming to the 3-minute old school standard of pop music, which is, I think, what bands like the Ramones were doing.
Rob, I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about, man.
This is 1-minute songs and below, right?
Yeah. The Dwarves do that quite a bit.
They were
Blood, Guts, and Pussy.
Yeah, of course. That's what I walk down the aisle to. But
I'm going to go Google that.
Again, they were pushing everything kind of to the max. So if punk songs are short, our songs are going to be shorter. God damn it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Just seems like they might have created more work for themselves. I mean, they could have just looped these parts a couple more times. Right?
Yeah.
Would we have really known the difference? Would the audience know the difference?
Song would have gotten stale by the end of it, Rob. You got to keep it fresh. Keep it fresh. So these sessions were live mic'd, meaning that there's just mics in the room. There's no separation. You don't have a drummer and a bass player and a guitar player all recording with the ability to fix mistakes on individual tracks. You take it all or you get rid of it all. Yes, you can tell. I mean, they spent a half an hour a song to record and mix. And as we've all been in a studio before, you don't walk in and 8:01, you're like 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you record for 8 hours. There's an hour of setup at least to get everything right.
You're setting up the instruments, and then you're getting levels for probably another half hour.
I don't know if they were getting levels or not, though, honestly.
There is cymbal
everything's
noise
turned all the way up. Okay.
Everything. 100% of the time, I can hear cymbals.
Yeah.
But yes, that's true. But do you think that like is why it sounds like a wall of sound? Is because it's just everything's not distinguished or distinct from each other. It's just one mic picking up everything all at once.
To be fair, it's not one mic.
Oh.
So they had an 8-track recorder, which means that they probably had 1 track for drums, 1 track for guitars, 1 track for vocals, and then maybe a room mic, and then probably 4 mics on the drum kit. And so
you lied to me.
No, I didn't lie to you. It says live mic'd, man. It doesn't matter. Like those, trust me, those mics on the bass amp were picking up the drums. The mics on the drums were picking up the bass.
That mean,
They're all
yeah, that
picking up the
means every
vocals.
mic picked up the cymbal hits, right? Because we're all just
Yeah.
in the same room. Whereas sometimes in the studio, people have baffles or the amps are in
Right.
different rooms and they're wearing headphones or some of that
Yeah.
stuff.
Or
I
certainly
remember
you're recording vocals separately
Yeah.
from the entire band in the same room.
I'm learning
I
so
remember an
much.
interview with the guy, the producer on the Lenny Kravitz album was saying that he would jokingly label the drum mics on the board snare, mostly tom, snare, mostly hi-hat, snare, mostly, because the snare was everywhere. When you're recording drums, the snare and I suppose the cymbals as well are just bleeding into every mic. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's very hard to do any kind of separation in that scenario.
Yeah. And I imagine the room probably wasn't very acoustically sound. And so there's all kinds of bouncing going around and stuff like that. And yes, Adam, that is, or yes, other Adam, that is a component of why this all comes at you. Because if you want to turn one thing up, you basically turn everything up in the mix. I also imagine that their instruments were turned all the way up.
Yeah, why not?
Oh,
Which,
yeah.
no, there's a good reason why not. It doesn't sound good. That's why you don't do that.
Well,
Yeah,
hold
but how
on,
many
wait.
albums have you sold?
Yeah.
It's not that far from 10,000, to be fair to us.
Yeah, it's really actually not that far.
Hell yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So the guitar sound on the front side of the album is all due to Justin's use of an MXR distortion pedal, which is like a pretty
Damn.
basic distortion pedal.
Yeah.
And I'm also guessing that the knobs were broken because he didn't change them in between songs. It
I
sounds
think you just
fucking
crank them
insane.
all to 11, man.
Exactly.
Everything
Everyone
is
all the way
up all the way. I think that is an aesthetic. And I feel like I've learned to just crank everything on the instrument itself. But then if you go to the amp and then you start cranking that, that's where you start to get into problems, right?
Yeah, that's definitely problematic.
Yeah, you don't want to crank too much.
So they record the A side of this album, which remember is less than 20 minutes long. They'd expected it was going to be part of a split with another band, but they're left with this 20-minute recording. And they expect that a record label is going to just put that out as is. They're like, yeah, here's the Napalm Death, debut full quote unquote full length album at 19 minutes. And that doesn't happen. And Justin particularly was looking to be in a band that had some more heat, was touring, could potentially have some real success, maybe actually make a little bit of money, which again, the anarcho anti-capitalist punk band is like, but we're not making enough money. Maybe I should do something else. When that doesn't materialize and when no record label wants to put this out, he starts to look around for different opportunities. There's a local band called Head of David that's looking for, of all things, a drummer. And so they say, hey, who would be the perfect drummer for our band? The guitar player from Napalm Death. He would be a great drummer for
Yeah,
our
that
band.
tracks.
Yeah. So he gets offered and he leaves the band in October of 1986.
Are you implying he wasn't a drummer? It was just like his arms can move fast. We've seen them move fast.
I have no evidence that he was a drummer before this, but Head of David was kind of like a bigger band in the scene, and they were torn like at least around England, and they were playing a lot more shows. Because remember, Napalm Death doesn't even play that many shows. It's not like they're playing every night at the Mermaid. They're playing a show like every month or two.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's how
he
long
wanted
it takes his voice to recover, I assume.
Jesus Christ, yeah.
Head of David is a terrible band name, by the
It
way.
is a terrible band name. Yeah. That's a very bad band name. All right. So Justin is frustrated, leaves the band. They've recorded just over 19 minutes of music. Nobody wants to put it out. But they say, hey, you know what? I think we can keep this project going. And Mick recruits a friend of his to play guitar in the band. Thinks he can still continue the project. And this is actually kind of the most fascinating part of the story for me is the hand that the drummer took in keeping this project going. Because that's not generally what drummers do. I've played with lots of drummers, and not a single one of them was like the organizing principle in the band.
Yeah.
It's not a knock on them either. It's just it doesn't tend to be, they don't tend to be the primary songwriters. They don't tend to be the people who are like running the business. They're kind of just like, guys, show up and play the drums. It's great. I hit shit. It's fantastic. So, but Mick He gets his friend to play guitar in the band, thinks that they can still continue with the project. However, around the same time, Nick is getting frustrated that the band is becoming too metal and getting away from their sort of punk roots. And he's starting to lose interest in the project altogether. It also does not help that he is apparently a raging alcoholic at this time and would show up to practice pants shitting drunk, just incoherent,
Nice.
not able to function. And he's doing this at gigs too. It's a fucking total mess.
Is
So
this when we play Is This Punk?
no, but
Getting your
I-
pants
listen,
on stage.
this is all punk. All right. This is all punk.
Depends on what you do with the shit after that. That's what G.G. Allen taught us.
Oh
Yeah.
God, yeah. Ugh. All right. So they decide, well, Nick's showing up completely shit-faced and baby pantsed. We need to get somebody to play the bass. He cannot be relied upon to be the bass player, but he can still sing. So they recruit a bass player, this guy Jim Whiteley, to join on bass. They play a few shows as a quartet, but shortly thereafter, things come to a head. And at a rehearsal in March of 87, remember, they recorded in August of 86, side A. And then in October of 86, Justin leaves of the trio. And now we're getting to March of 87. And Nick shows up to a rehearsal completely blasted. Mick Harris confronts him about his general lack of interest and is basically like, do you still want to be in this band? Apparently, Nick does not say anything, turns around, walks out of the room, and Mick Harris says he doesn't see him for 4 years until 1981 when he sees that he's in another band that's playing in the area, but just like completely gone, no contact, didn't say a word, turned around and walked out. And then also like wasn't going to shows and on the scene. Sounds like maybe he was just wallowing in alcoholism for a while.
Maybe he just shit his pants and he was too embarrassed to bring it up.
It's possible. I was giving him credit that maybe it was like a Jesus in the wilderness thing. He just had to go away for a little bit, fucking figure some shit out. So now Mick Harris, the last member to join before they recorded the A side of this album, is the only remaining member of the band. He's not a founding member. He only
Wow.
joined like a year ago.
That was quick.
Yes.
Insane.
So a lot of people would have said fuck it and moved on, but Mick decides that he's going to reconstitute the band. He gets the buy-in from Jim Whiteley to stay on bass, and he recruits 2 more musicians, Lee Dorian on vocals and Bill Steer on guitar.
Can we just one quick pause? We mentioned that the name was great. I think the name is what's holding them together at this point. They're like, we got a good name. We got to keep going.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can't
I
go
agree.
into another band that's just going to be called like, The Fervent or something like that. Like,
Or
stupid-ass
fucking
name.
Head of David.
Yeah, exactly.
Goliath's Hog.
I heard him talk about one of the other bands they played with was called Conflict.
Hell yeah.
That's
Hell
pretty
yeah.
So disgusting.
good. But if you're a crust punk, what do you think that crust comes from, Adam?
Oh God.
Imagine the smell.
Oh yeah, at those shows. Good Lord. Oh my God. So anyway, he's got Bill Steer and he's got Lee Dorian involved. Now, one of the problems is that Bill Steer lives in Liverpool, which is like a 2-hour drive from Birmingham, and Lee lives in Coventry, which is only about a half-hour drive from Birmingham, but like these guys don't seem like they got car money. And so I'm guessing it was probably like riding the bus. Actually, what? I will take that back. Bill Steer had actually been kind of successful as a musician before joining Napalm Death. He was the guitarist for a quote extreme metal band called Carcass.
Hell yeah.
And he was
So that's
actually
pretty
still
cool. Yeah, I like that. I mean,
that's
like
good.
that.
Yeah.
That's tight.
Yeah. So he was in Carcass when they recorded Scum. He was just sort of like, yeah, I'll come and record with you. Carcass is kind of a going concern. And so he thinks that the band's sounds are somewhat simpatico, but spoiler alert, when it comes down to it, and he's forced to choose, he does not choose Napalm Death and chooses Carcass. So we're going to level set. It's March of 1987 when Nick leaves the band, and Mick recruits a new guitarist and a new vocalist. And the B-side that we're talking about was recorded in April of 87. So this is a month later. They go in to the studio to record. Now, apparently, they had one rehearsal the evening before they went in and recorded this.
Hold on a
I
second.
mean, that sounds like a lot for what shows up on
But
the
no, let's clarify, because rehearsal typically means I am rehearsing the songs that are written. But it sounds like what you mean is we had one evening to write and practice the songs.
No, that's not exactly true, because Mick Harris wrote all of the songs on the B-side. Now, he had gone and met up with Bill Steer on 2 separate occasions to kind of go over what he thought the songs were going to be. And, they
You-
can't write sheet music or anything like
Ah,
that. So he's kind
right.
of just like miming out, this is what we think it's going to be.
You mean except for the cover of "Fly Me to the Moon" on there?
Yeah, exactly.
Can I
With
can
somehow
I
more
posit
flute
a
than the
question
Sinatra.
into
Yes.
this forum?
Of course.
What do we think these people are doing that is taking their time away from rehearsing?
Very good point.
They have to be working jobs, because there's no way this is paying the bills, right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
And they have to be drinking a lot, because there's no way that you can listen to this kind of music sober. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But it's kind of hard to do both of those things, like drink and maintain a job.
Mm.
Because
Many
the
have done it,
job is
other Adam.
here.
it's been done. Yes.
That's true.
Oh man. So yes, they did get together. The drummer and guitar player got together to kind of go through some stuff beforehand. But these are all songs that have, been written by Mick Harris. And when they did that rehearsal the night before the recording again, Lee Dorian actually didn't even participate in the practice. He was there, but they hadn't figured out like where the vocals were going to come in. So during the actual recording process, every single time that Lee Dorian comes in, he's literally being visually cued by somebody like pointing at him and being like, start now, every time he starts to sing.
Listen, Phil's not here tonight for music nerdery, but the guy's name is Dorian. Do you think there's even a chance that he's ever heard of the Dorian scale?
Dorian scale.
No. I would say that there's a chance he's heard of scales. A chance. So the B-side, recorded in April 1987, also at Rich Bitch Studios in Birmingham. All 16 tracks recorded and mixed in one 8-hour session, 120 pounds for an 8-hour session. So the album was mixed and recorded in 2 8-hour sessions, costing a total of 240 pounds to actually get this musical product committed to tape.
Damn.
Whew.
All right.
That's impressive.
That is.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give that to you.
Yeah. So, one of the things they talk about is on the B-side, Bill Steer tuned his guitar down a whole step for the recording, giving that kind of heavier, sort of like more loosey-goosey sound. Justin on the first side had his guitar tuned to standard tuning. And so you can definitely tell that's that sort of feel change when they get to the more kind of slinky, heavier sound
I
on
see.
side 2, because he tuned down a whole step, which is a lot to tune down your entire instrument.
And I'm
We
assuming
haven't-
they're playing. Good.
Oh, we haven't mentioned it yet, but they're from Birmingham, which is the same place Black Sabbath are from. And I feel like they really pioneered down tuning. In fact, I think Iommi used to tune down to a C sharp, which would be a step and a half.
Step
but it
and a
was,
half, yeah.
yeah, because I think we heard on our Black Sabbath episode, right, that it was based on his fingers and that machining accident. He needed them to be looser, but
Yeah.
Oh, these guys are from England? That explains why I can't understand them, because of the accent.
Yeah, that's why. Yeah. All right.
I actually was like thinking about these guys having a cup of tea and just the idea.
Pinkies up, gentlemen.
right.
Yes.
I was
All right.
actually getting a massage at one of these new age spas the other day, and they were playing this, and I asked who it was, and I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah. All right. So they have their full-length album recorded. They need to get this important piece of work out into the world. The first time they couldn't get any label backing for just the A side, but now they have a complete album. They approach a small indie label, aptly called Earache Records, run by a guy named Digby Pearson. He had founded it in between the time when side A was recorded and when side B was recorded. Basically, he would have released side A as it was, and then probably the project would have fallen apart. So the fact that there was a little bit of a gap and it allowed Mick Harris the time to congeal a new version of the project really makes it, I think, have a little bit more legs as a project. Not that many more legs though. So as we said, they only printed 1,500 copies. It ends up becoming an underground hit, sells 10,000 copies in its first year, aided along by infamous British tastemaker John Peel, who took a liking to the band, promoted them on his show, and they actually record 2 Peel sessions after the release of Scum. Now we're at the release of the album. We're going to get into some tracks, but just as a quick postscript, the band basically breaks up pretty damn shortly thereafter this and can't make it happen, even though they have what I am sure blew their expectations out of the water in terms of success with this album. Ugh. Are you ready to get into some of these tracks?
Let's do it.
Absolutely.
Yes.
First, I want to give a kudos to Tom for sorting through this mess and trying to pick anything. I mean, this was, I think, kudos to us as well. I haven't heard your comments on these songs, but my God, it was hard to come up with thoughts for all of these. Just my initial take there.